Good evening. We are in the presence of greatness. My name is Lily Allen. I am the Associate Executive Director of the LSU Life Course and Aging Center. And on behalf of the Center and in partnership with the School of Social Work, we sincerely welcome you to a very special and long-awaited evening. We are delighted that everybody is here. Before I turn over the stage to Eva, because this is her night and her story, and we are very privileged to be among her audience, I would like to thank several people who helped to make this evening possible. And I'm just wanting to talk about this woman so much because we know Eva is a force, she is an inspiration, and she is just a remarkable person and now a friend, so I'm very fortunate. So I have the sheer privilege of welcoming you and saying good evening. So there are a few people to acknowledge. First, the Pennington Biomedical Research Center, especially Barbara Corkin for her work and her organization to make this happen. Also, we'd like to thank several organizations in our university. First, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and namely Gaines Foster, who has been a very supportive help and a very generous source. Also, the School of Social Work, which is part of the College of Human Science and Education. The School of Social Work's director, Daphne Kane, has been very helpful with putting this together, and especially Ann Williams, who has been just a magnificent coordinator in terms of getting the CEUs offered for our social workers. There are people through the LCAC that have just been wonderful stewards. I'm looking at some of our graduate faculty and students right now who have really pulled together. Nikki Orso, for all of your work and your patience and your dedication. You have a lot of heart, and we thank you, as well as many of our students and our bright stars. And the Life Course and Aging Center focuses on healthy aging from beginning of life until the end of the life course. So we're very interested in resilience, health, quality of life, and all of the things that this remarkable woman is going to speak about. I won't tell too many stories, and I won't even venture to try to tell you about the unbelievable, amazing resilience and hope and healing that Eva has written about and spoken to, more than 5,000 audiences at least across the globe. But I will tell you a quick anecdote that reminds me of her spirit. Not that long ago, she was traveling to Israel, and in her usual form, the TSA officer approached her and said to you, "Do you have any weapons or anything sharp in your possession?" To which Eva responded, "Only my tongue." And I would add to that, to her wit, because that really represents who she is in terms of sowing the seeds. She's also said, and many people have read this, that she reminds us that anger and hate are seeds that germinate war. Forgiveness is a seed of peace, and it is the ultimate act of self-healing. So we all have much to learn from this remarkable woman. So we are just dedicated to hearing you and being open to your story. And again, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for coming to Baton Rouge and to honor us with your presence and your story. Quickly, at the end of the talk, there will be books for sale, and Eva will be generous to sign those books, and she has that will, of course, support her endeavor to continue to support Candles Museum in honor of her family and other survivors. And also, we may have time for 1 or 2 or 3 questions, and we'll play that by ear, and Eva, I'm sure, will be able to lead us, as she certainly can, in terms of what she will entertain. So thank you for coming. We're delighted to have you here, and just enjoy. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the wonderful welcome to Baton Rouge, I finally, after this long, long winter, you even got the trees to blossom. That is a really big deed. And the weather is wonderful, and your welcome is heartfelt, loving, and so I am in a very, very good environment. My lecture is divided in 3 parts. Part 1, how I survived Auschwitz. Part 2, the lessons that I have learned from my life, tragic life. And 3, we will have time for a few questions. Then after I finish, I will go to the table where there are the books. I will meet you one-on-one, sign your book, sign your paper, take a picture, and even answer a question. It was the dawn of an early spring day 70 years ago in May of 1944. Our cattle car train came to a sudden stop. We were cooped in the cattle car like sardines, and we have traveled for about 4 days. There was no room to sit. We were leaning against one another. In the cattle car, there were about 100 people, including my father, Alexander Moses, who was 44, my mother, Eva Mozes, age 38, my older sister, Edith, age 14, my middle sister, Elise, age 12, and Miriam and I, identical twins, we were only 10 years old. As soon as we stepped down from the cattle car onto a little cement platform called the selection platform, my mother grabbed my twin sister and me by the hand. We were her youngest children, and she was somehow hoping that as long as she could hold on to us, that somehow she could protect us. Everything was moving very fast. A lot of confusion, a lot of yelling and crying. And I, in my childish curiosity, I looked around trying to figure out what on earth is this place, when I realized that my father and 2 older sisters had disappeared in the crowd. Now holding on to mother for dear life, not really knowing what to expect, a Nazi was running and yelling in German, twins, twins. We did not volunteer any information. We had no idea what worked there. He noticed Miriam and me. We were dressed alike, and we looked very much alike. And he demanded to know if we were twins. And my mother didn't know what to say. She asked, "Is that good?" And the Nazi nodded yes, and my mother said yes. At that moment, another Nazi came, pulled my mother in one direction. We were pulled in the opposite direction. We were crying. She was crying. All I remember is looking back and seeing her arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never even got to say goodbye to her, but I didn't really understand that this would be the last time that we would see her. And all that took 30 minutes from the time we stepped down from the cattle car. Miriam and I no longer had a family. We didn't know what would happen to us. And we were standing, holding hands, trembling and crying. We became part of a group of little girls, all twins. In our group, there were 13 sets of little twin girls, age 2 to age 16, and one mother, her name was Mrs. Changeri. We knew her because my mother liked to shop at their store. I believe that the 2 mothers liked to talk about raising twins. On that long selection platform, which I measured in 1995 because I was always curious to know how long, how big the selection platform was. It measured 85 feet long by 35 feet wide. There were also other twins, little boy twins, aged 2 to 16, and twins and people who were older than 16. But I didn't notice anything. I was so preoccupied with my predicament. I also want to tell you that in my opinion, there is no other strip of land anywhere on the face of this earth that has witnessed that many millions of people being ripped apart from their families forever. And if any of you is interested in going on my yearly trip to Auschwitz, just look up our website. So, we were ripped apart, and our group was taken to a huge building. We were immediately ordered to undress. Our clothes were taken away, and we sat naked on benches most of the day. It was late in the afternoon when our processing began. We, the twins, were given short haircuts. The mother's head was shaved. Our dresses were returned with a huge oil-painted red cross on the back, and the mother was given striped prison uniforms. Then they lined us up for registration and tattooing. When my turn came, I decided to give them as much trouble as a 10-year-old could. 4 people restrained me, 2 Nazis and 2 women prisoners. While they heated a gadget, it looked like a writing pen with a needle at the end, and they heated the needle over the flame of a lamp. When the needle got really hot, they dipped it into ink, and then they burned into my left arm, dot by dot, the capital letter A, dash, 7063. My twin sister Miriam became capital A, dash, 7064. Auschwitz was the only Nazi camp that tattooed its inmates. My husband is a survivor of 4 years in Buchenwald. He does not have a tattoo. And if you look at my tattoo, you might think it has faded. No, it was always like that. And when I compared notes with my sister, she said that in addition to creating a general confusion, I bit the Nazi holding my arm. I am sure that I was capable of doing that, but I don't remember. I was raised to be a nice girl. And as we know, nice girls and nice boys don't bite. So I must have blocked it out of my mind. Once we were processed, we were marched throughout the camp. We arrived at a wooden barrack, a modular horse barn, crude, filthy. I have never seen anything filthier in my life. The barrack is divided in 2 by a brick bench. On each side of the brick bench, there is a walkway and then the 3-story high bunk bed. Miriam and I were given a bunk bed on the bottom. We have not stretched out or slept in 4 days. We thought maybe we could do that now. But in my opinion, human beings cannot function after such a traumatic day as we had, because I kept tossing and turning and I could not fall asleep. As I was tossing and turning, I noticed something big and dark moving on the floor, and I began counting. These were big things. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time I got to 5, I jumped up screaming, "Mice! Mice!" A girl from the top bunk bed said, "Silly kid, these are not mice. They are rats. And you better get used to them because they are everywhere." And they were. So now, couldn't even try to think about going back to sleep. We went to the latrine. And as I entered the place, there on the filthy latrine floor were the scattered corpses of 3 children. I have never, ever seen anybody dead before. But to me, the message was clear. That is what happens here to children. And that could happen to Miriam and me unless I did something to prevent it. So right then and there, I made a silent pledge that I will do anything and everything within my power to make sure that Miriam and I shall not end up on that filthy latrine floor. From the moment I left the latrine, I did everything instinctively, and I did everything instinctively right. I did not let any doubt or fear enter my mind. In my mind, I had an image of Miriam and me walking out of this camp alive. And I never let go of that image until the day we were liberated. Our daily routine. We would be awakened every morning at 5 a.m. to the shrieking sound of a whistle. We would help some of the younger children, the 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, to put on their shoes and lace them up. We never had to help anybody dress up because we never took our clothes off. All we really had were the clothes on our back and our lives. By 6 a.m., we were outside for roll call. Summer, winter, rain, blizzard, it did not matter. And I can tell you, by the time November and December rolled around, our shoes had lots of holes in them. Our dresses had lots of holes in them. Our underwear were gone. We had no sweaters, no jackets, nothing. When I go back to Auschwitz in the winter now, I am trembling even though I have 2, 3 layers of clothing, warm boots, and I wonder, my children ask me, how did you survive? I do not understand it. After roll call, we would go back to the barrack for Dr. Mengele's daily inspections. Mengele would come in every morning except Sunday, dressed in his immaculate uniforms, gleaming black boots, and a baton in his hand. And he would count us every morning. He wanted to know how many guinea pigs he had. Then Mengele would leave, and we would get breakfast. Breakfast at Auschwitz is nothing that anyone would write home about. It was nothing more but a brownish, bitter, lukewarm liquid they called coffee. At noon, if we were in the barrack, we would get a cream of wheat-like substance, but it looked like cream of wheat. We couldn't spoon it, nor could we swallow it. I have no idea what it was. I assumed that they concocted it because it looked good, but it really was no use to us. And at night, we would get a very dark piece of bread about 2.5 inches. It tasted pretty good, and it filled my empty stomach. So after 3 days in Auschwitz, I realized that at night, I could sleep even though I was very, very hungry. But the days without any food were agonizing. So it made sense to me that I should save my bread for next morning. But next morning, my bread was gone, stolen by those huge rats. So I had a very difficult decision to make every night. Should I eat my bread tonight and have something to eat? Or should I save it, gamble, and maybe have something tomorrow morning? The truth is that I found out some 10 years ago when I talked to a survivor from Auschwitz who was grown up and working, and I asked her, when did you get your bread? Oh, she said, we got it in the morning before we went to work. We were not even given that much of a help. The Nazis knew how to keep the bread safe. We didn't. So after our breakfast, we would be taken for experiment. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they would put us in a room for up to 8 hours a day naked. We would sit on long benches or stand. Most every part of my body was measured for hours compared to my twin sister and compared to charts. These experiments were not dangerous, but even in Auschwitz, I had a tremendous difficulty in coping with being treated like I was nothing more but a living piece of meat. And the only way that I could cope with those long hours is by blocking it out of my mind. On alternate days, on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, we would be taken to another lab that I called the blood lab because they took a lot of blood. They would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow. They would take a lot of blood from my left arm. At the same time, they would give us a minimum of 5 injections into my right arm. The content of those injections, we didn't know then, nor do I know today. They were germs, diseases, and drugs, conducted by the German pharmaceutical company, headed by Bayer Corporation. After one of those injections, I became very ill with a very high fever that I desperately tried to hide because the rumor in the camp, all our information came from 2 sources, personal experience or rumors. And the rumor was that anyone taken to the hospital never came back. So I did not want to be taken to the hospital. I knew I had a very high fever because it was August and the sun was burning my skin, but I was still trembling. Both my legs and arms were swollen and very painful, and I had huge red spots throughout my body. The next visit to the blood lab, they didn't tie my arms for blood taking and injection. Instead of that, they measured my fever. And I knew I was in trouble. I was immediately taken to the hospital. The hospital in this case was another barrack. The only difference it was filled with people who looked more dead than alive. Next morning, Dr. Mengele came in with 4 other doctors. And Mengele and those 4 doctors came to see me twice a day for the following 5 weeks. Mengele never examined me, which really was surprising to me. All he did, he looked at the fever chart, and then he declared, laughing sarcastically, he said, "Too bad. She's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." I made a second silent pledge. I knew Mengele was right, but I refused to die. I said, I will prove Mengele wrong. I will survive and be reunited with my sister Miriam. For the following 2 weeks, I have only one clear memory. I remember crawling on the barrack floor. I was crawling because I no longer could walk. And I was crawling to reach a faucet with water at the other end of the barrack, because this barrack was not even allocated water. And as I was crawling, I would fade in and out of consciousness. And even in a semi-conscious state of mind, I kept telling myself, I must survive. I must survive. After 2 weeks, my fever broke, and I immediately felt a lot better and a lot stronger. It took me another 3 weeks before my fever chart showed normal, but I can tell you I still had fever, because what I really did, the nurse would come put the thermometer under my armpit, and then she would leave. I would take it out. If it was too high, I would shake it down, put it back in, and let it stick out in the back. So this way, I had control over how much fever it showed. And I was released and reunited with my twin sister and the other twins. But the happiness of our reunion was short-lived. Miriam looked very sick. She looked like all the people I left in the barrack of the living dead. And in my understanding of Auschwitz and how people lived and died there, I believe that to survive Auschwitz, one had to have a little bit of luck or a guardian angel and an unbelievable will to live. Once people gave up their will to live, they were as good as dead. And what would happen, you could see throughout the camp people sitting and staring into space. Miriam was sitting on the bed staring into space. I was shocked. I said, what on earth happened to you? What have they done to you? She said, I cannot talk about it. I will not talk about it. And we never talked about Auschwitz until 1985. The word Auschwitz never came up in our conversations. In 1985, I asked Miriam again. I said, Miriam, do you remember when I was taken to the hospital? She said, yes. I said, well, what happened to you while I was in the hospital? Because, see, there is only one single book written about Mengele's experiments. She said, well, for the first 2 weeks after you were taken away, I was kept in isolation with Nazi doctors studying me 24 hours a day. They were talking about something was supposed to happen, but I don't know what that was because they didn't tell me. So I don't know if what they were waiting for happened or it didn't happen. Well, it was the same 2 weeks that Mengele said I would die. From that book that was written about Mengele's experiments, I have learned, and from the Auschwitz Museum, that they had 1,500 sets of twins, 3,000 children. There were some teenagers and some grown-ups too, but mostly children. And I have learned from that that the estimated number of survivors that were liberated in Auschwitz was only 200 individuals. Most of them died in the experiments. Would I have died? Miriam would have been immediately rushed to Mengele's lab, killed with an injection to the heart. And then Mengele would have done the comparative autopsies. In normal life, you cannot do it. But in Auschwitz, everything was possible. So most of these other twins died in the experiments. I told Miriam immediately, I said what they were waiting for didn't happen. They were waiting for me to die. So I proved Mengele wrong. I survived. I said, what happened to you after the 2 weeks were up? She said, I was taken back to the labs, injected with all kind of injections that made me very sick. We found out after the war that Miriam was always weaker than I was. And she got married in 1957, expected her first child in 1960, and she developed severe kidney infections that did not respond to any antibiotic. 1963, she had her second child, and this time the infections got worse. And the doctors in Israel studied her, and they found out that Miriam's kidneys never grew larger than the size of a 10-year-old child. So she was, when I didn't die, Miriam was injected with germs, something to stunt the growth of her kidneys. I begged Miriam, I said, you have 2 children, that's pretty good. don't have any more children because every pregnancy is a life crisis. But Miriam didn't listen to me. And she had a third child. And after the third child was born, her kidneys started to deteriorate. And by 1987, she needed to go on dialysis or have a kidney transplant. She was a registered nurse, and she didn't want to live on dialysis. I had a very difficult year because my son was fighting stage 4 testicular cancer. And I told her that as soon as my son is out of any danger, and I will undergo studies to make sure that I can become a suitable donor. And I was amazed that my kidneys functioned at 90% efficiency. Well, once my son was better, on November, I flew to Israel and donated my left kidney. We were a perfect match. At that hospital, they have been doing kidney transplants for 10 years, and they had 2,000 kidney recipient survivors of the transplants. All of them were given anti-rejection medication because the rule is, if the body starts rejecting an organ, there is nothing that anybody can do about it. None of them developed cancerous polyps, but Miriam, a year after the transplant, developed cancerous polyps in the bladder. They removed them. They tried different treatments. And for a while, we thought that it might work. But unfortunately, by June 6, 1993, the cancer metastasized everywhere, and Miriam died. I will take you back to the camp for a few more observations. What I realize today, that children cope completely differently than grown-ups. It takes children all the energy to function in the here and now. They cannot project forward, nor can they project backward. This is the reason when you travel with young children, they don't want to nag you, but they will keep nagging you. When do we get there? When do we get there? So when I was in Auschwitz, I didn't become suddenly stupid, but I thought that the whole world was a big concentration camp, that everybody in the world lived like I lived, without parents, without relatives, in miserable conditions, starving to death, surrounded by Nazi guard day and night. That is the way the world was. In late August, an airplane appeared over the skies of Auschwitz. It was flying very low. I could see the American flag on one of the wings. That gave me hope and determination to live one more day, survive one more experiment. And hope in Auschwitz was in very short supply. The airplane made the yellow smoke circle right above the camp. Then the first airplane disappeared. The bombers came and bombed outside the yellow smoke circle. I was never scared of the bombing. We would watch the bombs fall and kind of applaud. Why? Because we knew as soon as the Nazi would be defeated, we would be free. And the more bombings there were, the sooner we would be free. By the end of September, we had 2 air raids a day. So in my childish mentality, I said, the good guys must be winning and the bad guys must be losing. And I was right. Suddenly, our experiments dropped from 6 days a week to 5. By October, we had 3 air raids, and the experiments dropped from 5 to 4. And by the end of November, we had 4 air raids a day. All the experiments stopped. 4 air raids a day. Do you know how that feels? Like a continuous battlefield. Every single one of us could sense that this cannot last much longer, that someday soon we will be free and we will go home. But we had no idea how that would happen. Nothing really happened until early January, and I know it was after New Year because I remember that there was a lot of dancing, drinking in the different guard towers that were around the camp, and we thought it must be New Year's. A few days later, they told us, everybody out of the barracks, we are taking you deep into Germany to protect you from the fighting. Well, again, my childish mentality served me very well. I thought to myself, I didn't like the Nazis when they were winning the war. They were mean, and I figured they would be even meaner now that they are losing the war. So I didn't want to be near them. We stayed in the barrack. I talked to a survivor who went on the death march. And I said to her, why did you go out into the cold winter into nowhere? She said, well, they came in with their guns and forced us out. No one came into our barrack. So again, I call it a guardian angel. Our barrack was skipped. Next morning, we woke up. We opened the barrack doors, and all the guard towers were empty. All the Nazis were gone. We were so excited. We were on our own. In Auschwitz, in 1945, there were 150,000 inmates. That was a big camp. Auschwitz II, where I was, sits on 450 acres. So from the 150,000, according to the Auschwitz Museum record, there were only 8,500 who stayed behind. The grown-ups cut the barbed wire so we could go from camp to camp. To organize in camp language meant stealing from the Nazis. But I don't like to call it stealing, because I don't really think I stole anything. We were organizing bread, water, and blankets. One day I was in the kitchen, and anytime I got to a kitchen that had bread, I would load up with as many loaves as I could carry. And we heard the strange sound of a car. No one had cars but the Nazis, so we went outside to investigate. There was an army vehicle like a jeep. 4 Nazis jumped off, took out their machine guns, and they began spraying bullets indiscriminately. The last thing I remember was the barrel of the gun pointed at my head, 3 or 4 feet from my head, and then I faded away. When I woke up sometime later, and I have no idea how much later it was, I tried to feel my legs I could, I tried to feel my arms. So I thought maybe that's the way it is in the other world. But as I looked down on the ground, there were piles of bodies all around me. I reached out and touched one of them, and she was ice cold. This is when I realized that I was still alive and all these people were dead. I raced back to the barrack where Miriam was watching our belongings, and I told her what happened. And we were very sad that these people survived all these months and years in the camp just to die so close to liberation. Then we wondered, why did the Nazis come back? That wasn't good news. Well, we found out in the middle of the night. They blew up the gas chambers. They blew up the crematorium, the Canada building. They were trying to eliminate the evidence. Our barrack was on fire. Flames were shooting from the roof. We couldn't stand the heat, and when we walked outside, the same 4 Nazis I encountered earlier that day were waiting for us, ordered us to march. Anyone who could not walk fast enough was shot on the spot. According to the Auschwitz Museum, 600 people were murdered in 1 hour march from Auschwitz II to Auschwitz I, Birkenau to Auschwitz I. When we arrived in Auschwitz I, we raced for the 2-story buildings, and the Nazis hid in the bunkers. They couldn't take us any further. The Allies were outside the city limits. Heavy fighting was raging in the area. The Nazis were not willing to give up, and of course the Allies were trying to defeat them. For the next 9 days, we arrived in Auschwitz January 18, and we were liberated January 27. My biggest problem in Auschwitz was there was no water. I couldn't find anything to drink. I went to the nearby river, I broke the ice. And I lowered the container, and when I looked up across the river bank, I could not believe my eyes. There was a little girl, my age. She was dressed in beautiful, clean clothes. She had braided hair with ribbons, which was a style then, and she was carrying a school bag. That was such a big shock to me, to realize that in this world there were children who looked like children and even went to school. She looked at me too. Well, I was dressed in ragged clothes, swarming with lice, and the only school I was attending was the school of survival. A few days later, everything was quiet. And we thought, this must be the day we will be free. Nothing happened until late afternoon, when about 4 o'clock or 4:30, a woman ran into the barrack, yelling at the top of her voice, "We are free! We are free!" Wonderful. These were wonderful words. But I am the kind of person that I wanted to see what did it mean. How did she know that we were free? I didn't see anything happening outside. I went downstairs, I stood there half an hour. It was snowing heavily. It was a complete whiteout. At a distance, I could see lots of people, and they were all wrapped in white camouflage raincoats. They were smiling from ear to ear. And the most important part was, they didn't look like the Nazis. We ran up to them. They gave us chocolate, cookies, and hugs. And this was my first taste of freedom. For me to realize that Miriam and I were alive, that we have triumphed over unbelievable evil, that my little promise to myself, that first night in the latrine, became a reality. That was an unbelievable experience. The Soviet army that liberated Auschwitz came into the barracks. They drank a lot of vodka. They did. And they danced a lot of Russian dances, and we stood in a circle and we were clapping. Next day, the 28th, the 29th, and I think the 30th, they surveyed the camp. On the 30th, or thereabout, because I didn't have a calendar, I didn't know that I would have to ever talk about it, they ordered us, or told us, no, they didn't order, they were pretty polite to us, to wear these striped prison uniforms and marched us between 2 rows of barbed wire fences. It was cold. Most of the children didn't want to put on the prison uniform. I said to Miriam, let's just wear another layer of clothing. It's okay. Well, that is the reason I believe that Miriam and I are leading the front, the parade out of the camp. And then we were taken, after that, we were taken onto an orphanage because nobody survived except us. And for people who see the liberation picture today, I want to explain to you, we were not liberated, we were not marching between 2 rows of barbed wire fences. That was a staged liberation, okay? We were liberated hiding in the building. I want to thank you all for listening to my long story, a very shortened version of it. And the question is, why am I willing to keep traveling all these places, talking to all these people? Because I believe that I have learned some very important lessons from my life, and I call them life lessons, that I would like to share them with you, particularly for young people that might have a lot of merit. So life lesson number 1 is never, ever give up on yourself or on your dreams. Because if you give up, nothing will happen. And as I look at many of your young faces, I remember growing up is very hard. And I believe it's very hard if you live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, United States of America, even if you have loving parents, which is very important, and even if they are wealthy enough to buy you those designer jeans with holes in them. What kind of a style is that? I don't understand it. Or all the modern gadgets that money can buy. Even then, every single one of you young people wonders, how on earth will I fit into this big mixed up world? Will I be able to accomplish in life what I set out to do? And I can tell you, if you give up, nothing will happen. But on the other hand, if you follow my example, and this is what I would like to add to it, please remember that there is always hope after despair. And there is always a tomorrow after disaster. And if you don't give up on yourself and on your dreams, you can accomplish anything in life. That is the way I survived, and that is the way I live my life today. And I will give you another example of the way I use the never ever giving up attitude. The museum was burned by an arsonist on November 18, 2003. We rebuilt it and reopened in April of 2005. And everything in the new building looks very nice. And I liked, except in the bathroom, under the sink, there was an ugly spot, dirty spot, black and dark gray, crunchy to the touch, about 3 by 4 inches. So when we opened the museum for the next 6 months, every day I was there, I scrubbed the little dirty spot under the sink. Spick and Span, Mr. Clean, Ajax, Comet, and any cleaning supply I could find, and that spot wouldn't budge. So I got tired of it, and I covered it with a trash can. And the staff knew if they cleaned the floor, they should put back the trash can. Well, about 18 months ago, I'm going to the museum. Somebody forgot to cover the dirty spot. And it was looking straight at me. So I decided, today I am going to get rid of that dirty spot. I went to the supply room, and on one of the shelves, I found a little bottle of Goo Gone. I didn't know what Goo Gone was. I never heard it advertised. So I read the directions. I said, okay, I'll try it. Even today, I am surprised. In 1 minute, my dirty spot was gone. Finally, I won the battle of the dirty spot. But then I wondered, that bottle was on the same shelf for 7 years. I never noticed it before. I thought, do we understand the way our minds work? Could it be that there are solutions to most of our problems and they are right in front of us and we do not see them? It's a very interesting and important question, because I believe that there are solutions to our problems. But if we give up, we would never, ever find them. Life lesson number 2. One of the reasons, the number one reason that Adolf Hitler rose to power, and the number one reason that there are genocides in the world, is bad economy. Actually, in my tweet, I tweet. Oh, I do. Find me. I have some quite interesting statements. I say that bad economies are the seed for genocide. Bad economies create nothing good. Hitler rose to power because of the Great Depression. He promised the German people that he will take care of it. But once he was in power, instead of taking care of the problem, he used prejudice and scapegoating against many minorities, and particularly the Jews. Why the Jews and why the minorities? Nobody will stand up for the Jews and other minorities. Prejudice, unfortunately, as I look around in the world today, is still with us. It's rampant. And I will confess to you, I am prejudiced. I do not like, and today I lectured earlier this morning to a junior high and high school. When I was a school-age girl, we wore uniforms. And as I look at the students in school today, first of all, they wear all the technicolors in the world. Second, they are sloppy looking. The girls wear very low-cut blouses. And I tell them, usually, if they come to the museum, what did you think, that we are going to audition you for a sexy role in a film? Why did you dress that way? And I tell them that if I ruled the world, I would put them all in uniform. And then they complain, oh, uniform is terrible. And I said, why is it terrible? Well, we want to express our individuality. I said, I have news for you. Doesn't matter if you wear uniforms or low-cut blouses or flaunting your tush in some of your outfits. Those hip huggers are definitely an interesting thing to watch. As they bend down, the pants go down and the tush stick out. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that in my days we would have ever permitted anything like that. People were a lot more modest also. I said, each one of you want to remember, doesn't matter if you wear a uniform or if you wear your individual style clothing. You are unique individuals. The clothing will not change that. But the difference is that when you are a teenager or a school girl or boy, when you get to school, you always compare who is wearing what. And the guys really love those low-cut blouses. They don't have to look at Playboy magazine like boys used to look when I was growing up or we were growing up. You can see everything in the classroom. And of course, the guys are giggling and laughing because they know I am right. I said, you have enough time to be sexy after you turn 18 or after 3 p.m. or on weekends or on vacations. Why on earth do you have to be sexy in the classroom? Because the only reason you go to school is to improve your mind. And I don't see how these outfits will help you improve your mind. I don't like guys with long hair, ponytails. I don't like anybody with body piercing and tattoos. Well, about 15 years ago, I was asked to lecture at a local high school, and I'm heading to the auditorium. In front of me are 3 young men, about 16 years old, with the craziest thing ever. I never understand it, baggy pants. The crotch of the pants was the height of the knee. They could hardly walk. If they had to run for their lives, they had to pull those pants up or take them off. There was no way to run with that. They were holding it up with one hand, and the bottoms were cleaning the hallway as I was walking behind them. One of them dropped a book, and then he had the audacity to bend down and pick it up. I saw places where the sun never shined. I was really, really embarrassed. I've been lecturing by that time for 20 years. I have never seen anything like that. I went into the auditorium and went up to the teacher who invited me, and I told him what happened, and I said to him, these 3 young boys, they look like bums. They must be bums. And the only reason they would want to look like bums, they probably are on drugs, drug addicts. Why would anybody want to look like a bum? And I never really understand that. And he said to me, no, these 3 boys are very good students. They have never used any drugs. I was shocked. But I realized that even though I don't like any of these styles, and I will never like them, but I have to take the time to get to know the person and judge each person on their merits. And so I am making an effort to go beyond the long hair, beyond the body piercing, beyond the tattoos. And I'll tell you, I am really making an effort and get to know the person. And if I can judge each person on their merits, one person at a time, maybe I can eliminate prejudice from my own heart. And if everybody will do the same, we might be able to make a difference. Life lesson number 3. I have forgiven the Nazis. I have forgiven everybody. If anybody would have asked me 20 years ago today if I was going to forgive the Nazis, I would have told them, please find a really good psychiatrist and have your head examined because you must be crazy. I had no intention of forgiving anybody. Even though my film, I am in the film, but I didn't put that in it, that the producer did, and I objected to it, that I have been thinking about forgiving. Incorrect. I didn't think about anything like that. So 20 years ago, I was a very good victim. What does it mean to be a very good victim? I was angry with the world. I hated everybody. And I yelled a lot. People whom you meet sometimes who yell continuously, they seem to be angry. They don't like anything or anybody. I think they are very good victims. They have a problem. And nothing really happened to change that. I told my children that I apologized for yelling them when I shouldn't have yelled at them. But that's what victims do. After Miriam died on June 6, 1993, I came home as a realtor. I had an open house on Sunday, and there was a message on my answering machine from my brother-in-law in Israel who told me Miriam died. I immediately called Israel. I have never buried any member of my family. And I pleaded with him. I said, I wanted to come to bury my only sister. He said, we cannot wait for you. The funeral is in 10 hours. Israel is 7 hours ahead. There is no way you can make it. I wanted to touch Miriam. I wanted to really verify that she was dead. I have never had the opportunity to verify any member of my family. Over 100 members of my family, uncles, aunts, cousins, grandparents, sisters, and my parents all died. But my brother-in-law said they cannot wait. So I was left with an enormous amount of pain. I was very glad that I was very busy in my real estate business. During the day, I didn't have to think about it. But at night, I would wake up in the middle of the night, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I experienced the way my sister died. And that went on for about a month. A month later, unrelated to Miriam's death, I received a telephone call from Dr. John Michalczyk, a professor at Boston College, Jesuit college. And he said to me, Eva Kor, I am doing a conference on Nazi medicine. I heard you speak at Boston School of Medicine, and I like what you had to say, and I would like you to come to Boston and lecture to some doctors. I said, I love to lecture to doctors. He said, really? I said, yes. He said, why is that? I said, well, I go to the doctors and they tell me I'm too fat. I eat the wrong food. I don't exercise enough. And after they chew me out, I have to pay them. So I would like to tell the good doctors what they do wrong, because in my opinion, doctors do a lot of things wrong too. And after I choose them out, I really look forward to them paying me. Now, wouldn't you all like to tell your doctor what you think about your doctor and then have them pay you? Well, anyway, he said, okay, when you come to Boston, he said, it would be really, really nice if you could bring with you a Nazi doctor. Stunned at that request, I blurted out, where on earth do you think I can find one of those guys? Last time I looked, they weren't advertising in the yellow pages. So he said to me, you like to joke a lot, Ivra. I said, yes, I do. I said, I have cried for 1 month. I don't think I have any more tears left. So he said, okay, think about it, and maybe you come up with some kind of an idea. And the last project that I worked together with my sister Miriam before she died was a documentary done on the Mengele twins by a German television network. We finished it in 1992, and it aired March 15, 1992. And in that documentary, there was a Nazi doctor from Auschwitz. His name was Hans Munch. He was not my doctor, but as I found out from the documentary, he was a friend of Joseph Mengele's. So I thought maybe he might be still alive. I immediately faxed a letter to Germany, to the television network, and asked them to please give me Dr. Munch's telephone number in the memory of Miriam, because I tried to get that telephone number in 1992, and they refused to give out their guest telephone numbers. Now, in the middle of the night, I am getting a long sympathy letter and Dr. Munch's telephone number. I called a friend who speaks German well. I understand German, but I wouldn't dare pick up the phone and call anybody in Germany. And I said, invite Dr. Munch to the Boston conference. My friend Tony Van Rentergam from Holland called me back next day, said, Dr. Munch is not coming to Boston, but he's willing to meet with you at his house in Germany. So from that moment on, I stopped having nightmares. I was now concentrating on going to Germany to meet a Nazi doctor. You have no idea how scared I was. Anything I remembered about Nazi doctors, I didn't really want to experience again. But I was curious that I might learn some details of our experiments because he was a friend of Mengele. And I was curious, why was this Nazi doctor willing to meet with me? I arrived at his house on August 19 with 2 camera crews with my friend Tony van Rentergem, who was a Dutch resistance fighter, his wife, and some other people. And Dr. Munch treated me with the utmost respect, kindness, and consideration. Unfortunately, he said he didn't know anything about our experiment. That Mengele always said, this is top secret, and he wouldn't share any details. But he gave me a good interview for my Boston conference, and out of the blues, I never, ever thought about it. I heard myself say, Dr. Munch, by any chance, do you know anything about the operation of the gas chambers in Auschwitz? And he immediately answered, this is the nightmare that I live with every single day of my life. And I can tell you that from the time that I went to see Dr. Munch, everything worked like clockwork, like somebody was directing it. Personally, I am not a religious person, but I do not understand how any of it came about. And so here Dr. Munch is telling me about the gas chamber. He said people would be very tired, dirty, and excited when they were told that they are going to take a shower. He said the shower rooms, the floors were gleaming, the shower heads were polished, and people, the workers there would spread a lot of perfume. So as people entered the shower room, they really felt good. Once the shower room was packed, the doors were closed hermetically. Dr. Munch was outside looking through a peephole. The gas did not come from the shower heads. A hatch opened in the roof. Zyklon B pellets looked like white gravel. They would be in canisters. The canister was opened outside and dropped through the hatch opening in the roof, and they fell to the floor. They operated like dry ice. So actually, the gas was rising from the floor. As people were suffocating, were climbing on top of each other, forming a little mountain of intermingled bodies. As he was watching from the outside, he said, when the people on the top of the pile stopped moving, Dr. Munch knew that everybody was dead and signed one death certificate. No names, just the number of people. I didn't even know they signed any death certificates. 500, 1,000, 2,000. I told him immediately this was very important information. I have been dealing with my understanding of the Holocaust. I wanted to learn more about it since 1978. I have never heard about the gas chambers, how they operated. I never read about it. It was completely news to me. And I told him this was important information. And right on the spot, I said to him, I want you to come with me to Auschwitz. I want you to sign a document at the ruins of the gas chamber in the company of witnesses. So if I ever meet a revisionist who says the Holocaust didn't happen, I can take that little document and shove it in their face. And he immediately told me I would love to. I really didn't know it was going to be that easy. And I want to remind you, I have met in my entire life only one single Nazi after the war. And that Nazi that I met happened to be a Nazi who was stationed at the gas chambers. To me, that is amazing. So I came back to Terre Haute, Indiana, very, very excited that I will have an original document signed not by a survivor, not by a liberator, but actually by a Nazi. That to me was really important. And for some strange reason that I still cannot understand, I wanted to thank this Nazi doctor. I didn't want to tell anybody about my ideas because I was sure that people would try to discourage me and call me crazy. So I didn't know where to look for any idea of thanking a Nazi doctor. Where does one look for it? Well, I went to the local Hallmark shop, and I went to the thank you card section. Now, I really want to be fair with you. I didn't expect to find a thank you card for a Nazi doctor. I really didn't. But what I thought, if I immersed myself in reading lots of cards with thank yous, maybe my mind would come up with some kind of an idea. And I read cards for 2.5 hours. 2 ladies came up to me. They said, "You've been reading those cards for a long time. Are you finding what you are looking for?" I said, "Not really." "Well, we would like to help you. Tell us what you are looking for." I said, No, thank you very much." I left the card shop, but what I want to remind you is that I did not give up on that idea. So I went back to my life lesson number 1. For the next 10 months, while I was cooking, cleaning, doing the laundry, or driving the car, when my mind wasn't too busy, I kept asking myself, how do I thank this Nazi doctor? What can I give this Nazi doctor? Lots of ideas popped into my head. None of them seemed appropriate until 10 months later. There's a simple idea. How about a letter of forgiveness from me to Dr. Munch? I immediately knew that this was a meaningful gift for Dr. Munch. But what I discovered for myself was life-changing. I discovered that I had the power to forgive. No one could give me that power, and no one could take it away. It was all mine to use it in any way I wished. Up to this time in my life, I always reacted to what other people did to me. Now I initiated action, and to me, that seemed to be very important. I did not know how to write a letter of forgiveness, so I began writing my letter. It took me another 4 months to finish it. Finally, I liked what I wrote. I worked through a lot of pain. And then it occurred to me that somebody might read my letter. English is a beautiful language, a rich language, and a very difficult language. And I didn't want to be embarrassed should anybody read my letter. So I called my former English professor, told her what I was doing. She got very enthusiastic. We met about 3 times. And the 3rd time she said to me, "Now, Eva, that's very nice that you're forgiving this Dr. Munch, but you really need to forgive Dr. Mengele." And I tried to object to that. She said, "I know that this is just a little letter, so do me a favor," she said. "When you go home this evening, pretend that you are talking to Dr. Mengele and telling him that you forgive him, because I want you to see how will it make you feel if you can say to Mengele, 'I forgive you.'" I thought it was an interesting exercise, and I tried it. And I said, "You son of a gun, Dr. Mengele, what you did to me. But in spite of all, I forgive you." And when I said, "I forgive you," I said, wow, I even have the power to forgive the God of Auschwitz. Mengele thought of himself as God in Auschwitz, and what he wanted, this is what happened. I am not hurting anybody. And so it really makes me feel good, and if I forgive Mengele, I might as well forgive everybody who has ever hurt me. So that is the way we arrived in Auschwitz on January 27, 1995. Dr. Munch came with his granddaughter, daughter, and son. I had my daughter and son with me. Dr. Munch wanted to read the document in German. We had it in German and English. He felt it was a very important document for him to read, and it was closer to his language that he wanted to read it in German. The people who filmed it are not the same people who produced the documentary. They wanted read it English. There was a big, stupid debate going on, and we didn't seem to resolve it. So ultimately, I read Dr. Munch's document in English. He signed it. I read mine and signed it. And I immediately felt that all the pain that I carried around for 50 years was finally lifted from my shoulder. I was no longer a victim of Auschwitz, nor was I a prisoner of my tragic past. I was free of Auschwitz and free of Mengele. I want to explain to people that forgiveness has absolutely nothing to do with the perpetrator. Forgiveness is for the victim to heal themselves. Can you imagine if we could help all victims who are liberated from atrocities? We give them food, shelter, medical, legal help. If we could have a few workshops for forgiveness, at least plant the seed that they don't have to feel like victims and angry for the rest of their days. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Because no person can forgive in the name of another person. That forgiveness is as personal as chemotherapy. You cannot do it for anybody else. Because what happens to victims once they are liberated from atrocities? Emotionally, they remain victims. And they pass on their anger and pain to their children and their grandchildren. I can tell you of one incident that really was to me eye-opening. Dr. Munch, who went with me to Auschwitz, was the only Nazi doctor who was willing to testify publicly about what he knew about the gas chambers. After that, was interviewed by a reporter in 1997. His name is Bruno Scherer. He wrote a long article in Der Spiegel magazine. Der Spiegel magazine is like German version of Time magazine. And in that magazine, he put in Dr. Munch's home address. Dr. Munch's house was firebombed 3 times. It was all my doing. I took Dr. Munch to Auschwitz, exposed to all these people. I called Bruno Scherer in Berlin and I said, Mr. Scherer, what's wrong with your brain? Why would you put a person's name, address in a national magazine when you are calling him a good old Nazi? He said, well, my grandfather was a survivor of Auschwitz. I finally got even with the Nazis. I said, you make me sick at my stomach. This was the only Nazi who actually saved 30 inmates in the camp, the only Nazi who was even called by Dr. Lifton, the human being in Nazi uniform, who was willing to testify about the gas chambers in Auschwitz, and now you got even with him. So what happens to children and grandchildren of victims? They will lash out at any opportunity when they can victimize the perpetrators or the children of the perpetrators. It becomes a vicious cycle. There is no end to it. So that is the reason I am so enthusiastic about the idea that we can do something about it. We can teach people to forgive. People who remain angry, and anger, in my opinion, are a seed for war. no happy person, no person who likes the world ever wanted to start a war. On the other hand, people who forgive are at peace with themselves and with the world. Therefore, I call forgiveness a seed for peace. I need a lot of help. So what I would like you to do, if any of you is angry with anybody, please try to write a letter to them. Work through all your pain. You don't have to mail it to them or give it to them. The forgiveness is to help you, not the perpetrator. And once you forgive and you realize how you feel about it, it's tremendously empowering. Then teach somebody else to forgive. Because I want you to help me sow those seeds for peace throughout the world. Congratulations, you survived my lecture. You are free. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have been a wonderful audience. We will take a few questions. So this is the time you speak up if you want to. And if not, you can talk to me later. Yes.
You've seen how governments can progress and take over and do bad things.
Right.
And so, in my view, our government is becoming more intrusive in our lives.
Well,
I'm wondering what your thoughts are about our government and also what Putin is doing.
what do I think about our government today? I think we are in trouble. I don't think that the biggest problem that, as I made from the beginning, is bad economy. And I don't think that our economy is improving very much. I think we need to have somebody who understands economic growth more than growth of government. Growth of government is not creating money. And when people get poor, somebody said to me, my executive director is a very big supporter of our president, and I love him dearly. I adore him. Actually, he's a very smart young man. And I said, well, I would like you to show me one single government law that would create wealth. He was kind of stunned. I said, ultimately, we are all going to be poor. I lived in communist Romania for 5 years. The government took everything away. We were all poor. But I'll tell you one thing. The leaders, Ceausescu and Soviet Union, Stalin, they all lived in big palaces. The rest of the people were poor. So, any government law that you think is going to create wealth, you are living in La La Land. Yes, the government can help people. Some programs, education would be okay, but I think anything that you cannot legislate wealth. It's impossible to legislate wealth. What, in my understanding, I came here to United States with 2 suitcases from Israel, and I really thought that United States is a land that the streets were covered with gold. That's what we thought in Europe, that America, everybody was very rich. I was very surprised, and I realized people had to work hard here. But because people have the initiative, why am I willing to work 80 hours? Now, about 60 hours a week now. I dropped 20 hours. Why is anybody willing? Because they want to improve their lives. They want to discover something. They want to help their children. They have initiative to do better. If you take that away, when I went back to Romania in 1995, after I left in 1950, 45 years later, my unpaved streets in my village were still unpaved. There was still no running water. and people were not only economically impoverished, but mentally tremendously impoverished. Poverty of the mind and the human spirit. If you take that away from people, there is nothing left. What makes one country living in similar area rich and another country with similar earthly riches so poor is that the government imposes laws that stop people from thinking and stop people from trying. So that is a problem. President Obama never invited me to give him my opinions, but I sure would like to share them with him or with any government official.
So as we come to a close, I just want to thank everybody for coming. And on behalf of our wonderful visionary leader, Dr. Katie Cherry, our executive director of the LCAC, thank you for a very enriching, inspiring, beautiful night. We've had a wonderful crowd, and we thank you, Eva Mozes Kor, for your inspiration and your lessons. Thank you.
You're welcome. How do I get down from here? We are going to go around? All right.